Good day, everyone. Today we're going to look at UPS aircraft and become a bit more familiar with them. I ask that you bear with me here as I'm going to try to push through this PowerPoint without stopping. So I may make some errors, hesitations along the way, and I ask just to be patient and try to follow through with me, and we'll get through this as quickly as possible. One of the things I'm looking at wanting to achieve here is I want each of you to become familiar with the type of aircraft, construction, structural materials, and the hazards that are at UPS. Also have a better understanding as to key access points and the flight control on the deck, as well as be able to explain the best fire suppression practices that is recommended by UPS. As many of you already know, UPS has a major transportation hub here at King County Airport. While cargo fires are rare, they are possible due to the type of packages and materials that they carry on there. As you'll soon see, and many of you are already aware of, cargo fires, when they do occur, are very difficult to extinguish, mainly because of the tight spaces and limited accessibility into the fuselage, especially when cargo containers are in place. UPS right now use 5 different aircraft. As you see here, they have a 757 series, 767. They use an Airbus 300. They also use the MD-11, which used to be McDonnell Douglas, but now is part of the Boeing realm. They also use a 747. UPS, though, however, will be using a newer version of 747 starting in 2022, I believe. It's going to be bigger and be able to carry more equipment than the current 747-400 that they are currently using. The materials or the information I'm pulling from is based on a pamphlet or booklet that UPS put out for airport rescue firefighting. That pamphlet is available on the emergency reporting training site there, as well as it will be on the ARFF drive with a link that I will provide in the email for you. Also, some information I am pulling out from Boeing's complimentary supplement as well on the type of aircraft that they have, and also a little bit of information I pulled out of Airbus as well. In accordance with Part 139 and also highlighted in NFPA 10,003, ARFF has 3 primary responsibilities: that we respond, that we provide adequate fire suppression, and that we perform rescue operations. So that's kind of how this the UPS ARFF manual is kind of centered around, and that's kind of what we're looking at, and that kind of meets these 3 criteria that we're going to try to achieve here. So what I'm going to do next is kind of just talk about the manual. I'm not going to go through it step by step, page by page. I'm just going to highlight what the various areas are as it deals with each aircraft, and let you to take a look at the manual, print it out for your own records if you wish, however you want to use it there, but know what's in there and what to look for the information. So I went ahead and the first thing we're going to be doing is looking at the response aspects. Safety to us is paramount first, life safety. So the biggest danger or hazards that we may be facing in with an aircraft upon arrival is the intake and exhaust capabilities, especially, obviously if the engines are running. So each of the sections will cover what the danger zones are for each of the aircrafts, both on the intake and exhaust, both in the idle thrust as well as takeoff thrust modes. So as you can see, there is some changes, especially with takeoff. It tends to expand it a little bit in the front and significantly in the back as to creating some sort of physical hazard to both the firefighter and any other personnel standing in the background. Also, for each aircraft, they identify or provide a diagram here as to the flammable material locations. Primarily, as you'll see, fuel tanks are located in the wings as well as in the center. However, there are some aircraft that will also have fuel tanks both in the tail sections there on both the fins and the tail portion as well. So just kind of be aware of that's where your primary fuel locations are going to be. It also gives you some other areas of concern, mainly like APU emergency controls and where the APU fuel line is, and even where the APU is located as well. Some of the aircraft will have composite materials built into the structure. So for those aircraft that do have that, diagrams are provided to show you where those composite materials are located on that particular type of aircraft. Once you make our response, one of the things we want to do is try to implement a rescue and fire suppression at the same time. So kind of talked about the fire suppression, locating where the fuel's at. So for rescue, diagrams are provided as to access points where you can look at to be able to enter the aircraft if need be. Also gives you a cockpit layout as to where personnel might be located at. There will be no personnel within the fuselage for a freighter type aircraft. They will all be up in the front end area there. And that can range anywhere from, as you see here, 7 people to include the pilot and co-pilot, as well as up to as many as 12 people in their 747 version. So it's good to try to get that body count that might be in the aircraft as much as possible. Also, but it may not be possible, so you're gonna have to kind of guesstimate what you might be playing with there, depending upon the type of aircraft. Also, as you see here, there could be crew sleeping locations that somebody might be located in, and mainly for the 747. Excuse me, and where they are located at there within the cockpit area. Also, the manual provides you access locations and controls on how to open entry doors and other locations within there. So take a good look at that and see how it applies to each of the aircraft as well. Also within the manual, they kind of give you a little layout on the flight deck controls. Here what we're looking at is where the thruster levels are, how to turn off batteries, how to activate fire extinguishing systems within the engines and things of that nature. So this is kind of give you a quick diagram as to where the key components are and where they're located at, so that you can find that. Again, take a good look at that. You may be tasked to go up there and turn off some of the systems. Battery locations are also paramount. Again, there are diagrams available or provided that shows where the batteries are located at for each of the aircraft. And this could be far ranging. They are not necessarily always in the same general location for all aircraft. Here you got a diagram where it shows that it's in the nose as well as another one back in the tail area. Um, Other aircraft may have the batteries located more in the midsection, up in the wheel well areas. It's just hard to say. Also, a diagram is provided on how cargo containers are kind of placed within the particular aircraft, so you get an idea as to how many containers might be in there. This can also be useful if there is a particular container that may be on fire for some particular reason that crew member kind of tells you about, been able to pinpoint it at, and you can kind of get an idea as to where that might be located at for any type of ATRET piercing operations. Also, I added into the manual just a list and with diagrams as to the type of containers that UPS uses. I think this is important so that you at least have an idea and maybe can use it as a visual marker as to how big the container is and what kind of suppression tactics you might want to try to employ on that particular container. Now, for best practices, what I've come to find out or seen through some literature is that, and this is also recommended by UPS as well, for us, the most practical and probably effective suppression equipment available for us is going to be the high reachable extendable turret or ATRET, and also using the FLIR camera in conjunction with that. As you can see here, this is kind of how you make that approach. This gives you a wide range of abilities to be able to pierce the fuselage or pierce the aircraft at different angles to try to get the best maximum effect upon the fire without having to go in. But to understand that, though, you need to have somewhat of an understanding on how the fuselage itself is constructed and where it might provide resistance. So as you can see here, essentially modern day aircraft, large aircrafts that UPS uses, has some sort of ribbing system. So what that means, as you can see here, is that it has a circular type support with cross members that extend through the length of the fuselage. And sheets of metal or aluminum are attached to the fuselage with rivets at these locations. So the weakest part is going to be piercing the aluminum in between the rivets. That will give you the least resistance of being able to punch through into the fuselage as deeply as possible with little to minimum damage of the piercing nozzle. If you try to pierce the fuselage in line with one of the rivet lines there, you're going to have greater resistance and possibly could damage the ATRET tip itself, depending upon the strength of the struts there that are diagrammed. So one of the things to kind of look for if you get a chance is try to identify where those rivet lines are located at and try to get your piercing nozzle in between those at the weakest point. Also, what they found through a series of tests is that the best locations, especially on the upper deck level, is at the 2 or 10 o'clock position. This is usually where the container is the closest to the fuselage itself, and therefore you stand a greater chance of piercing through the fuselage and into the container itself to address the fire. If you try to go in lower at a lower angle, such as in this case a 3 o'clock or a 9 o'clock position, obviously you could see, and even in the diagrams associated with this particular slide, you can see that there's a space in between there where you might get the piercing nozzle through, but may not necessarily reach the container itself. In this particular case on the far right, you'll see a pallet type system. If there was a fire in there, then piercing the container is not an issue because there is no container, and just getting water on that as quickly as possible could help control that fire as quickly as possible. On the lower deck level, as you can see here, again, you're looking at issues of trying to pierce it at a location that gives you the maximum reach necessary to get to the container. However, it is much more difficult because it has other void spaces and all the other areas of resistance, as you can see in the far right picture. So what UPS recommends is the center diagram as being the best piercing locations for their aircraft to give the maximum impact of water or foam upon the fire. And with that, they give you a checklist. So this is kind of the end of the training here, the course. So again, I hopefully you have some idea on how UPS aircraft are constructed and their materials that they are using and some of the hazards associated with those. Again, I encourage you to look through their ARFF manual as to their particular aircraft and become more familiar with that. Also look at the key access points and become familiar understanding where they are and flight deck controls. Again, talk amongst your crew members on the best suppression practices and how you guys might employ those in your particular staffing level situations. And I also encourage you, I'm a big person here on pre-incident planning. Come up with a series of plans internally as to how your crew, based on your staffing levels, and might go out there and deal with any one of the UPS aircraft out there. And don't look at just a single aircraft, but even if you have 3 or 4 of them out there and one of them decides to catch fire, try to have a pre-incident plan as to how you're going to deal with that. What are you going to do with those other aircraft that are next to the affected one, and how to address that, and what things you might need to do that, and maybe what personnel, UPS personnel, you might need to employ to help you remove those exposures. And then kind of practice. And the practice doesn't necessarily mean getting out there and driving out there, though that will work as well, and I do encourage that. But also talk about, use the dry erase boards downstairs and, make diagrams and develop scenarios and kind of talk it through and come up with a plan of action. So that pretty much concludes the training. Hopefully that is helpful. One of the tasks will be for each crew to make contact with UPS over there, and I will provide a name and phone number for a point of contact where you can go out there and take a closer look at one of their aircraft and maybe be able to get on board and take a walk through the cockpit area and kind of see how it's all laid out there. So thank you very much. Hopefully this has been helpful. And again, I appreciate you putting up with my limited expertise in providing narration, but hopefully this has been helpful. And again, I encourage you to really take an interest in that ARFF manual that UPS provides and become familiar with how it's laid out. So have a good day. Thank you much.